Hey folks, David Stewart here. So, in the last week, since I made my first Last Jedi little review, consumer focused review, I've gotten thousands of comments on the channel related to this new Star Wars movie. And it's really impossible for me to go through and just answer all of them because it takes too long. So, what I thought I might do is just try to answer some that I see a lot of, kind of right now in a video, and make that a little bit of a video. So you can have this on in the background and listen to kind of the Q&A, and I'll try to highlight some comments and some criticisms of me and things like that. And then I'm sure I'll get, many more comments. I have 3,000 comments on just 2 videos. So it's kind of hard to keep up with them all. Maybe we can have like a Star Wars, bitch about Star Wars live stream or something on New Year's Eve, or like maybe the day after Christmas, and talk about a lot of these things. Because it's a lot of fun to talk about from a writing perspective. How this particular movie ended up kind of panning out with story and with its execution. So I'm going to start with just some of the highlighted comments on this first video, Does It Suck? This is my consumer-focused review. I talked about a lot of the technical things with the movie, which were good, like the cinematography, special effects, sound design. Those were all good. Story was really lame. It kind of, crapped on the universe and crapped on the characters, and had most of the plot would have been avoided if anybody had acted normal. But that still means a lot of people are going to like it because they don't care about the story. And in fact, I would say, before I even start reading comments, most of the people I know in real life who liked this movie, like if I see them on like my Facebook feed or something, they like pretty much everything. That's just something I noticed. I don't notice people who are digging on these new Star Wars movies who don't always like pretty much every blockbuster movie that ever comes out. There's probably more things they like in terms of dislike, which just means that my standards are a little bit different than theirs. And if it's an exciting, sort of visually stimulating experience, it's probably going to be good for them, and they should see it, right? But for people who want a deeper story, a little bit more criticism is required than, oh, it's visually exciting and it's a roller coaster ride, So let's take a look at this first one. Pretty much agree. The story and some of the characters kind of ruined the movie. I never thought Mark Hamill was that impressive in the originals, but Daisy Ridley and John Boyega are just awful to me. Mark Hamill was great in this new movie. He really sold a character that I didn't like, and probably one that it looks like he may not have liked either. However, even though he wasn't the best actor ever in the originals, when we look at the originals and those young actors, and we go and compare them to the young actors of these new movies, I think the quality of acting from Mark Hamill, you can kind of see it for what it is. And of course, he's grown in the industry, right? That was 40 years ago that he did the first Star Wars movie. He's had 40 years of experience in voiceover and acting experience. And of course, he's gotten better at what he does. And that's great. So I can kind of see that on display. As an old, angry man, I thought he was really effective. I really, really liked the quality of his acting, though I didn't like the character and I didn't like the dialogue that was spoken. And it's a great thing to notice that you have a good actor speaking bad dialogue, you don't notice how bad the dialogue is. You have a bad actor speaking bad dialogue, you really notice it. Or just even an average actor, like John Boyega, I don't think is a bad actor. But you hand him a bad script and he can't sell bad lines. Same thing with Daisy Ridley. I don't think she's a bad actress, but you hand her a bad script and she can't sell the bad lines. You become really, really aware of the bad dialogue, and then you start to say, well, they're a bad actor. I think they were awful because the dialogue was awful. So that's sort of my response to that. I wish I could have disappeared like Luke after watching the movie. That movie was like I was thinking about it after I watched the movie. I think it was like a bad dream. It didn't make any sense. You had images that were familiar yet strange. Things were disjointed, and then while the entire time I was watching it, there was always this like feeling of like everything's wrong. This isn't right. Like nothing felt like Star Wars, and I kind of had to dig down to the bottom of it. Is that there wasn't a big reason behind any of it, even though it kind of looked like Star Wars. There was a lot missing. That core is rotted out. So, Luke Skywalker, apparently a murderer. He will get zapped by the Emperor to save his dad from the dark side, a dad he knew for all of about 15 minutes, versus wanting to kill his nephew that he knew his whole life. On a hunch, does this sound like Luke Skywalker? Seriously, no, it doesn't, and that affected a big part of the believability for me. I'm not going to read this entire comment. But Rey with zero training and no heritage is able to fight as good as Yoda. She defeats Luke, who's using the Force. It seems kind of like nonsense. And just to reiterate, people kept it's okay for Rey to not come from a Skywalker heritage. But people were expecting that because there was no explanation. There was no reason for her to be as strong with the Force as she was, or for her to know how to do the things. So there's always been in Star Wars, like, you find someone who's strong with the Force and you train them to be a Jedi, or you train them to be a Sith, and then they grow in power as they learn to manipulate the Force. In this case, it's like she knew how to like mind manipulate people in Force Awakens, and she knows how to lift rocks at the end of this without ever like practicing any of this stuff. So it becomes a completely unbelievable thing. We're looking for a reason for that to exist, and I think part of the direction that Rian Johnson went in was just to make sure that was completely meaningless. Like, he wanted it to be meaningless. And by the way, another comment I've gotten, apparently his name is Ryan Johnson, and I'm like, well, why doesn't he spell his name as Ryan? And it's like, I guess he doesn't. There's people who spelled, I'm reminded of like a Brian Regan joke. It's like, how do you spell your name? Amy? A-M-Y? It's like A-Y-M-E-I-E-Y-E, Amy. It's like, some people spell their names weird for some reason. I've never heard another human say his name out loud. I know that sounds weird because I don't really watch TV, guys. I don't watch any stuff that talks about this stuff. I read articles, and that's it. So because I've never heard someone say his name, I didn't actually know it was Ryan. So hopefully you'll forgive me if I say Rian instead of Ryan. When I see R-I-A-N, I think Rian, because it doesn't look like Ryan to me. Of course, you do have Brian, B-R-I-A-N, so that would kind of negate my thoughts on it. But I've also seen Brian, B-R-Y-A-N. So anyway, giving you a little bit of forgiveness for that. Let's keep going. Visuals top-notch, but behind that, nothing. Still the perfect definition of mannerism. I don't know about mannerism in like the classical sense, like the art sense, but essentially it's just you are replicating the aesthetic qualities of other things. That's what I think Shinsari here is trying to tell me. It's weird how Luke and Rey kept emphasizing how powerful and dangerous Kylo Ren is, but then Rey kicked his butt in Episode 7. He doesn't do Force Lightning. He doesn't do super jumps. We haven't seen him do anything cool other than he did like stop a blaster bolt in midair, which we've never seen before, and that was, to me, that was kind of cool. And actually, that reminds me, think about expectations. I talk about expectations a lot in that hate letter video. You have an expectation when you have the audience that's surrounding the Force, and I think it's okay to play with those expectations. I think you can introduce a couple new things in every movie, but what you can't do is have everything be new and nothing be set, right? There are rules to fantasy. I've talked about that in my fantasy doesn't excuse impossibility thing. I think you have the freedom to do a couple new things every movie, but if it's just helter-skelter, then people who have any kind of experience with it, that upsets their expectations to the point where they think that you're stupid and they don't want to watch the movie. It'd be like, in every Iron Man movie, you can have an Iron Man suit that does something that you haven't seen, like the hand flies off, or I don't know, there's some other weird thing it does, but you probably can have like one or two of those things per movie. You don't have Iron Man suit turning into like the Megazord and like smashing Godzilla. You don't have it turning into like a kite and flying away. You don't have it pulling out Harry Potter wands and doing like Expelliarmus curses everywhere. You have like, it's pretty close to how it originally was. So I think with these new movies, you have just no respect for trying to do what is there with some variations, like something new, but still meeting the expectations of what people have. Hate the cheesy one-liners that we see in Marvel and now in Star Wars movies. I heard Justice League did it too now. I've got episode 8 spoiled on me online, so I'm no rush to see it. Good, don't see it. Like, the only way that you can send a clear message that you don't like these kinds of movies is to not see them. I didn't like the one-liners either. In the original movies, they were sort of part of the context of what was happening, and it's part of good script writing is that you have dialogue that is interesting in the moment but still kind of fits the scene. You don't add to a scene dialogue that has no place in it. So you have lots of little funny banter, when Han is rescuing Han and Luke are rescuing like Leia in that first movie. You have, aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper? That's like part of the context of what's going on there. You wouldn't just have her make a joke about him being short later, like randomly. It's like, well, what does him being short have to do with anything? Is he even that short? The purple-haired admiral of the feminist resistance didn't have to explain her plans to no stupid man. Now, what's funny is there's this kind of feminist line that people are talking about. What's really funny is that if they are, in fact, trying to present like a feminist perspective on Star Wars, they're doing a really bad job of it. All the women in this movie are incompetent and awful. And then you're also sending a message to girls that, like, there's something that you're going to instantly be good at with no effort and no requirement on you to practice. So you see Rey, and it's like, oh, it's so great to see a female hero. It's like, but she's not showing any kind of actual virtue. She's just good magically. There's no comparative virtue to what past characters went through training and struggling against their limitations or something like that. What would have been better is if Rey, you're strong with the Force, and then she has to train to become more powerful, like her male counterparts, right? If you believe that feminism's about equality, then it should be an equal representation of what is possible with a man, not she's limited because she's a woman, and not because she's automatically good because she's a woman either. So I don't know how much of it is like feminist and how much of it is just like really bad writing, or if there's like, because it's a girl, everybody kind of let the bad qualities of that pass through. I'm not sure quite how that relationship works, but my guess is that I don't think Rey has any particular feminine qualities. I don't think she's a female character. I think she is aesthetically female. She looks female, but she doesn't express any particular female perspectives. That part could have been exchanged. Like, you could have somebody of a different gender, and the part would play the same, right? It'd be the exact same part. Nothing would change. So to say that Rey is good for being female, there's nothing particularly female about her either. And if we put a boy character in there, I think we'd all still kind of object to it because it would be an annoying author insert, kind of like what John Boyega's character and Poe kind of become in this new one, The Last Jedi. They feel so awkward because they're really overpowered. Like at the beginning of Last Jedi, you have Poe kind of one-manning the destruction of this massive dreadnought, and even though he's like a terrible officer and gets everybody killed, there's always this sense that he's like invincible, and he kind of talks like everything he says is really awkwardly put. It doesn't feel natural. It feels like somebody kind of impressing the best qualities of themselves upon the screen. He's always excited. He like rubs his droid like it's a dog. It's all a little weird with Poe's character. None of it quite feels right. And that's because there's no reason for him to act the way he is or to be in the position that he's in. You would think somebody who rose to the level of commander would have a better idea of command, right, than somebody who is just some random pilot. But he plays like he's completely inept, and he is. Like, everybody is just incompetent at their jobs in Last Jedi, and that's what it affects the believability of it big time. So from Tree Rock Creations, it figures. I heard that this Star Wars was made for kids, especially with the dumbed down jokes. It's like it's for kids, but it's also hyper violent. It's a movie for kids that also contains murder. I knew the visuals would be better than J.J. ADHD Abrams, and they were better. Who can't set up or shoot a drama or action scene, and Rian Johnson actually can. However, like I said, I think the art of storytelling is dying in Hollywood, and I don't trust it to make an intelligent, coherent story. It didn't make one of those. Hollywood really makes idiot properties, not intelligent properties. And this is a point that you could talk about sort of ad nauseum. If Disney wanted to tear down and remake Star Wars, right, then why did they buy Star Wars? They could have made a new original IP, or they could have bought a different IP. There are thousands of great science fiction fantasy IPs out there for you to work with. And why did they buy Star Wars? They bought Star Wars because Star Wars had the biggest fan base and had the most value attached to it. So when you buy Star Wars, all the fans are going to come watch the movies no matter what for at least a while. So you sort of have a guaranteed return on getting people in to see it. So there has to be a deeper reason for why they would just sort of demolish and remake it. Hollywood is terrible at coming up with original ideas because of the risk factors involved and because of the way that things kind of go through so many millions of processes, so many millions of checklists before they get to the screen. Like, most of the originality is robbed out of these blockbuster movies well before they're being shot. Sometimes they have 17, 18 different script revisions. I think Snow White and the Huntsman had upwards of 30 different script rewrites. And we saw what came out at the end of that. It was bad. And it's kind of like too many hands in the pudding. You're having to hit too many check marks and satisfy too many people. The end result ends up being really bad. So they're really bad at coming up with new IPs for kind of the same reason, is that an IP is kind of Star Wars is a great example. It's George Lucas had massive help, but it's essentially coming out of his psyche. Just like Lord of the Rings was coming out of J.R.R. Tolkien's psyche. And even though other people kind of put their spin on that, they're not creating the same quality of thing in Hollywood. We haven't seen like a good IP creation in Hollywood maybe since like the 80s. I don't know. Maybe since like Terminator. I can't think of any that became like franchises in the 90s that were good. You have like Chronicles of Riddick. It's not really that good, Highlander was not that good, and that was from the 80s. So I don't know. It doesn't appear to be very good at creating original ideas. So it's important that you buy ideas that have lots of value sort of invested in them, so that you can milk the return and get the dollars out of them. It's really, I don't know. Hollywood continues to get worse, and I'm still finding that missing piece is like, to account for all the bad writing, there has to be some level of like having to hit a check mark of politics. There has to be some kind of little bit of political direction that you kind of have to add on to get your movie made. I honestly thought it slightly beats Attack of the Clones as the worst Star Wars movie. Oddly enough, Attack of the Clones was, I think, the prequel that I enjoyed the most in theaters. Fun fact. Bad acting, check. Poorly written dialogue, check. Horrible ham-fisted attempts at romance, check. When Rose just like knocks John Boyega's little speeder out of the way, how she caught up with him, we don't know. But she knocks it out of the way, and then she's like, we're going to win this war by saving those we love. It's like, we probably just killed everyone by letting this cannon blow up the base, Rose. And now you're going to die too, while all the AT-ATs look at us for no reason. It was just like, that almost came out of left field. It's like, we spent a little bit of time together in this subplot. Now we love each other, right? It's like, okay, why not? Terribly choreographed fight scenes, check. Yes. Plot points that go nowhere, check. Thing that makes it worse is the previous Star Wars and Force lore being turned on its head. It makes midichlorians look like poetry in comparison. True. Not just turned on its head, but like destroyed, so that you can't have any expectations about it. It doesn't feel like a coherent system anymore, like something that could exist or exists in some other realm. And that was what was cool about Star Wars. And that's what was cool about Empire Strikes Back, is that Empire Strikes Back felt really real. It looked really real. Things in that universe felt like that they could actually be a real thing. And now, not so much. Now we have no way to predict what happens. And really, that's the hallmark of reality, by the way, guys, is that you can predict what happens. When you turn on a light switch and the light comes on, that's because things work the way that you predict that they will work. When you throw a ball up, you expect it to come down. You create a model of reality that predicts how reality is going to act. That's how we operate out in the world. And so one of the things that made Star Wars really good, I think, was that there was a great predictive model once you kind of, digested a lot of Star Wars. You had this feeling that you knew how the world worked and you knew what to expect. And the surprises that came were sort of naturally born out of that, or like I said, just one little variation rather than lots of things changing. Wasted over 30 years to see Luke, my childhood hero, drink breast milk from an alien's tit. Thanks, Disney. Yeah, all right, let's take a look at this next one, right at the core. The Farce Awakens was just one Force Ex Machina scene after another. It kind of was, yeah. New trilogy aside, I've been completely uninterested in their side movies. Rogue One, Han Solo, Obi-Wan, Boba Fett. It is really amazing that with all the lore in the world, they want to give me more information about characters that I feel I do not need any more info on. Even General Grievous would interest me more than those, because at least I get a few questions answered. That's true. Why do we need to see a Han Solo side movie? Is there something that we don't understand about his character that needs to be revealed? I think it's just milking the IP. I felt that way with Rogue One. It was pure fan service. Obviously, other people are going to disagree with me and think it was good. I thought there was no reason for it to exist. And because there was no reason for it to exist, I kind of felt like it was just a waste. Even though, I still feel like there might have been a good movie in there somewhere, like a movie that I would have really enjoyed. but then it got kind of edited out by Disney. They reshot 40% of the film, and I'm aware of the stuff that they reshot because it's not in quite the same style. Things sounded a little different with it. You know, you could tell it was done by a different director. I don't know who did that. And then, of course, like the added Darth Vader scene at the end, I just thought was completely superfluous. Other people liked it because they've been waiting forever to see Darth Vader actually like be a badass. But I didn't need it personally. So anyway, George Lucas meant it when he said he was the only one who could make a Star Wars movie. Yeah. You can't separate creator and creation very easily. Like if you had 4 new guys say that they're going to be Metallica, I don't think anyone would accept that as Metallica. I don't quite know why we accept it with movies. Maybe that attitude will change in the future, but I don't think it's something that we should really be ready to say like, oh yeah, have you seen the new Alien movie? It's like, why would I see that? It didn't have anything to do with like Ridley Scott. I know that he made the newest one, but I was thinking of like the 90s. Let's go see Alien Resurrection. I'm like, why would we see that? It doesn't have anything to do with the people who created it. Even Aliens was like different director, James Cameron. Although Aliens is cool, that doesn't. Most of them are not aliens, you know. I'm being that guy. Without George Lucas, it's not Star Wars. Lucas had a vision. Disney has shareholders to answer to, which is interesting because Disney has the potential to destroy the value of Star Wars and thus make the shareholders quite angry. So again, there's that extra little bit that there's some other level kind of going on there other than pure profit. Although this will probably be a pretty profitable movie, it seemed to have smashed records at the box office for the opening weekend, but we'll see how it does as things go on. This is the best breakdown of what was wrong with Last Jedi. Thank you. I describe movies like Episode 8 and 7 and Rouge as being like a fireworks show. Pretty to look at once, but with no substance or deeper meaning. No real reason to see it again. I completely agree. I think all of those movies had, pretty good visual appeal to them. I even think Force Awakens, although I had technical problems with its visual appeal, I can get why a lot of people liked the visuals. There were some creative visuals in there that are probably worth seeing once, but I have no reason to like, I'll never put in Force Awakens and be like, oh, let's watch this one. This one has some cool scenes. It's like, don't need it. The underlying consistency of the first 6 Lucas films that's missing in these Disney movies. Yeah, there's no consistency. I'm not going to read that whole comic because it's long. Disney Star Wars is not Star Wars. The prequels were Star Warsy at the core, but they didn't look like the original trilogy, and because of that, they were scorned by many. There were also problems with acting, dialogue, pacing, etc. Yeah, that's true. In fact, I've been meaning to do this. I did a really in-depth analysis of the first Star Wars movie, and I want to do one for all of the original 6 Star Wars movies. It's just a lot of work to sort of construct everything I need to deliver that in video form. So I'll be working on that in 2018 for sure. So if you stick around, you'll see me kind of point out some of the problems with the prequels. So the prequels had lots of issues that were kind of like an Achilles heel. Like there was lots of great things about the prequels, and then there were really bad things. Like in Episode 1, you have this child actor playing Anakin that was frankly awful, and also affected the believability of Anakin and Queen Amidala, or whatever title she gets, Padme gets in the later movies, because of the age difference. Like if you'd swapped the genders there and you'd had an adult male hanging out with a 10-year-old girl that you knew he would eventually marry, you'd think it's a little weird. Just saying. So there was lots of little things like that. Plus Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar Binks, if people had loved him, then it would have been fine, but he was awful. So the Disney trilogy looks Star Warsy on the surface, but there is nothing at the core. That's how I feel. But people seem to love it because it looks like the original trilogy. Obviously, Disney has a better idea of what's going to sell than I guess I do. And that's sad to me because I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive. I think you can have the great visuals that are going to appeal to people and have a good story. I do not think that those things are incompatible. But I think that there's people who end up making incompatibilities because there's so many different little check marks you have to go through when you're producing the film. So we've got to have, maybe there was a check mark, like we have to have a female protagonist, and the story has to do this, the story has to do that, and so you do that to meet all the check marks, and there's not a chance for you to make anything original. In the end, this series is called Star Wars. It's about conflict. If you make these conflicts pointless and senseless, then call it another name. Yes. Why can't we make another one? Well, I guess there's no original thought in Hollywood. Nobody's actually good at creating new stories, so that's probably why we don't get it. Finally, someone who acknowledged the fact that the new prequel trilogy is much more complex than the old one. Proud to be subscribed. Thanks for subscribing. The story is more complex than the old one. So the original trilogy is simple themes and a simple story, well executed. The prequel trilogy was a complex and very interesting story with uneven execution, or in some cases poor execution, depending on what part of what movie you're looking at. And so that's why I think, it's worth looking at the prequels, especially if you're a student of film, to understand what was going on there and what George Lucas was trying to do and what might have sabotaged his efforts in the eyes of a lot of fans in particular. I walked out of The Force Awakens feeling insulted and used. With that movie, they effectively told me that the movies I loved as a child didn't achieve a damn thing, and the heroes I looked up to were losers. These new movies are the Highlander 2 of Star Wars. Ambitious and misunderstood. Highlander 2 is bad. It's like Highlander 2 is another one of those movies where it's like you can almost sense that there might have been a good movie waiting to be made somewhere in there, and it was all destroyed what was good about the previous movie and was full of badness. In short, all flash, no substance, and hordes of fans willing to encourage such mediocrity by repeatedly paying for it. Yep, totally agree with your points. Thanks for the video. Thanks for watching. Lucas had a great combination. The imagination of a child, yet also the maturity to understand the tales and themes of myth. Disney's new Star Wars has no imagination, and they are drawing their stories from the previous Star Wars films and not the source material that inspired the original Star Wars. That's kind of true. I do think that they are not drawing their stories from the previous Star Wars films at this point. That was true for Force Awakens, which was rehashed Episode 4, but at this point, they're not rehashing the old stories. I think Rian Johnson intentionally tried to do the opposite of what everything that was established prior to that, and that's kind of the outcome. So I guess I disagree with that a little bit. Let's see if I can find people who are calling me a jerk. I'm happy to say that this time around I haven't gotten any death threats yet. I got death threats last time, and that was always an interesting experience. I've never had anyone say they were going to track me down and kill me unless I took a review down. Kind of weird. Luckily, nothing ever happened to that, and I think that was just, edgy. It's just some edgelord who didn't like that I didn't like Star Wars. If they were interested in anything other than creating movies to sell merchandise, they would have hired people like Timothy Zahn or the numerous other professional science fiction writers who have been creating great Star Wars books for the past 30 years. Star Wars is now just a vehicle for selling merchandise and video games. You can sell great merchandise and great video games with great movies as well. I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. They could have their cake and eat it too. You just have to write a good story. Let's get down to some new stuff. The core is always going to be George Lucas. That's a good one. For any kind of reason being placed into the 9th episode, well, J.J. Abrams will be directing it, so we'll see how that goes. Therefore, there won't be any reason because he's awful at telling stories on the big screen. Great comments. I love the prequels. I didn't love them, but I appreciate lots of things about them. The overarching theme I got out of the sequel trilogy is so far nothing matters. Yep, that's what I feel like. It's like they undo all of their expectations. Gee, could it be that the Hollywood left, and all the leftists for that matter, hate and have no understanding of Western civilization, values, heroics, romance, etc.? I don't think it's that they have no understanding of it, or that they hate it. I think what I actually do think is that the American left, in particular, takes this sort of relativist, multicultural stance, which is you take morals and you take the virtues of Western society and you reduce them, you say that they're merely aesthetic. And aesthetics can matter, by the way, but we say that they're merely aesthetic. They're just one way to look at it. They're just a surface level appearance thing. And there's many different aesthetic systems. So, and that in turn means that it's on the same level as other cultures, right? That all cultures are equal and valid. Now, the funny thing about that is the idea that other cultures have something valuable to offer to yours is fundamentally a Western value. That's fundamentally a Western perspective. You don't see that in China or Japan or places like that. Japan for hundreds of years was outwardly hostile towards all like Western ideas, and then incorporated some in, but you're not really going to find too many people who are like, Japanese just copies the West, or the Japan is so Western. They view Western values as the same as theirs. They have their own, they have their own culture. Likewise, people in China are not going to consider that, Western culture might have something to offer them that's better than their culture. And they're not going to think that way. That's sort of a Western perspective, that you could take something from another culture and kind of incorporate it into yours if it improves on what you've done. So that's kind of interesting. And so once you reduce something to the level of aesthetics, and that includes reducing morals to the level of aesthetics. This thing's wrong here, but it might not be wrong over here. That sort of whole moral relativism, cultural relativism. Then you can mix and match things. That's kind of the postmodern ideal, kind of as much as you want, and the outcomes are the same. Well, I don't really think that. So I don't think it's that they don't understand them or that they specifically hate them. It's that they view them as the same as something else. And then you probably have a push from corporate to not necessarily promote Western values or to show them an equal footing with everything else. And so what you end up with is sort of a helter-skelter postmodern mess. Up through Empire, you could see the telling of the classic American story. Luke was Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, and there was the author legend in there also. These concepts carried the hope in Empire. Remember that the first Star Wars movie hit during the dark days of malaise of the Carter presidency, stagflation and all the other stuff. First Canyon with the girl in his arm reminded us that we're strong, young, confident people. The first time when we were told we must begin to doubt ourselves and our way of life. But Luke Skywalker swinging across the canyon with the girl in his arm reminded us that we were strong, young, confident people. Luke reminded us of our strength and confidence. But remember that the left hates Western civilization. They hate John Wayne and the American concepts of optimism and heroics. And the left has absolute contempt for the Americans right now, because look who we elected. They have no intention of giving us what we want in our heroes. So they turned Luke into a dark and soul, and declared that the past should be destroyed. American exceptionalism and foundational value systems. Remember, these are dark and self-loathing liberals who are making these movies, and now so is Luke Skywalker. So I think there is some truth to that, right? But I think it's more that because you really want to, and of course, like there's a certain level of dishonesty there, because you can't go to Saudi Arabia and like build a Christian church if you want to, right? So the freedom to compare different kinds of cultures doesn't exist outside the West. So the hatred of the West are really just the saying that the West isn't better than anybody else. And the only way that they tend or the arguments that they use to try to convince people that the West is no better than anywhere else is to essentially degrade the West to the level of other people or below it. So you hear constantly people talking about imperialism this and imperialism that, and like how bad slavery was, and never is there a mention that it's like, well, ours was the culture that sort of decided to abolish slavery. And we actually, in America, we fought an extremely bloody civil war over slavery. Slavery was a big part of it, at least. And so the abolition of slavery was a big cultural deal. And that abolition of slavery in other parts of the world happened through the West. And there is still slavery in some parts of the world. The slaves that we bought from Africa were bought from African slavers that captured other Africans and put them into bondage. There was a Muslim slave trade for a long time, but you never hear that other cultures engaged in slavery, that there was widespread slavery in China, in the East, that the feudal system itself involves serfdom, which is a type of slavery, and that we had white slaves from Europe. We had Irish slaves that were brought over to the New World. You never get put all of that stuff in context, because that puts the West in a place where it appears to be morally superior to other cultures. And that can't happen if you have this idea that all things are equal and all things are relative. You have to end up attacking the West, because that's sort of the pinnacle of virtue compared to many other cultures in many different ways. The West is like this pinnacle of truth. And so in order for you to incorporate the postmodern ideal, you kind of have to knock it down. So I think it gets kind of expressed as hatred of the West, but I think deep down the feeling is that like the West isn't, that everything is the same, that nothing matters, right? Like nihilist, it's like a nihilist kind of thing, or a relativist sort of thing, however you want to think about it. And that's, I don't know, that's kind of my whole encapsulating vision, is that it's not so much that they hate the West, it's that they kind of hate everyone, or they just view everything as meaningless, and therefore, in order to fulfill that worldview, you have to tear down the West. I know that that's kind of a long diatribe, and this particular video is going a little long. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to answer one more comment, and then I'm going to have maybe a part 2 that does the other 2 videos. So let me find a couple of good ones. See if I can find someone who's... here we go. Here's one that's probably going to disagree with me. I'm having to go deep to find people who disagree with me. So if you disagree with me, leave me a comment down below, and maybe I'll do videos about it. Say what you will about the prequels, and I do agree mostly, but they still had Star Wars quality to it. They offered something... Oh, never mind. That's someone who agrees with me. Let's find one. Somebody's got to agree with me. So somebody's got to disagree with me. Oh my gosh. It's really hard for me to find people. See, David, you're just not woke enough for this movie. Woke. I don't know. I'm having a hard time finding people who hate me and disagree with me. Not a little bit different from last time. David, you gave more reasons why The Last Jedi was actually worse than The Force Awakens, even though you said it was better than The Force Awakens. For me, The Last Jedi was the worst because The Force Awakens had some chemistry between its characters and a potential setup for great reveals. It did set up some great reveals, and I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that the characters had more chemistry in Force Awakens. However, I think Force Awakens didn't have nearly as a high quality of technical precision as this new one had. The visuals and the sound design were actually really, really good in The Last Jedi, and so that's where I ended up, especially in my first review, saying I think it's better than Force Awakens. I think it's better than Force Awakens because they both have bad nonsense stories, but one of them is technically better. I guess that's how I feel about it. But, you know, whichever one. I could be convinced either way. I agree with the main points, but there's something else. Storytelling has changed a lot, and the Star Wars universe fits badly with modern-day pace and editing. It's true. That's a really, really good point. Modern-day editing's really, it's kind of like J.J. Abrams is a great example. Everything's cut really tight, sometimes just a couple frames at a time. Rian Johnson did a little better job of it, but it's still pretty modern. This is also why horror movies are not good anymore. Yeah, they're not good because there's no anticipation of what's happening. There's no long drawn-out suspense of when is the monster going to jump out. As Alfred Hitchcock said, there is no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it. Directors and editors assume that audiences no longer have the patience to sit still and stare at long scenes, and yet it is these long, or rather patient scenes that help build emotion. Do see my video on comparing the Death Star attack in Force Awakens versus the original New Hope one. The one in New Hope was 15 minutes long, and it was just full of increasing tension and increasing uncertainty as to whether the thing was actually going to be pulled off. Whereas the one from Force Awakens is much less time, even though it's split with some other scenes. It's much less time. You see them actually attacking the Starkiller base, and you wondering whether they're going to be successful at it. It is these long or rather patient scenes that help build emotion. Instead, we have to cut the hell out of everything and make scenes flash and change from second to second. Our brains don't have time to process what's in front of us because the images are changing too quickly. Yeah, they give you just enough of an image for a person to kind of grasp what's there. And they might have figured it out scientifically. Like, how many frames does a person have to see before they can interpret what that image was? We don't have time to feel anything. It's true. Emotions take a long time, and they take, especially sadness, or fear, or any of these sort of more kind of visceral, deep emotions. They take you thinking about them and you relating them. If there's a sad scene and you think about something sad in your life, that's where people start to cry. Is that it invokes all these other connections rather than something sad happened, now there's things exploding. It's like you could kill a dog in the middle of Star Wars, New Star Wars, or kill a dog in the middle of Transformers and people wouldn't think anything about it. But if you had the boy loving his dog and then the dog was hurt and he's like, "It's okay, boy," and then everyone's thinking of their dog and you have time to watch the kid cry and then everyone's crying, that takes time to build up. Try watching an old Disney classic like Sleeping Beauty. Yeah, put kids in front of it and see how long before they get up and leave and start doing something else. You're most likely going to lose them in the opening music and credits alone. Or try the elephants on parade scene in Dumbo when the mouse gets drunk. We lack patience. In old horror movies, we would just stare off into the darkness for long periods of time, and we had to feel the tension of the characters. We had time to be scared ourselves, very true. We had time to care about the people in front of us. In A New Hope, they made us care about Luke Skywalker in the first half hour. That's true. We see a poor farm boy hungry for adventure. His friends have already gone off to join the academy. He discovers his father was a warrior. He sees his aunt and uncle burned to a crisp by the Imperial forces, their skeletons lying on the ground. It's a movie for children. When his hate for the Empire explodes, so does ours. They spend time making us care about Luke. Remember the scene where Luke stands on the cliff and stares off into the horizon at the double sunset, while the emotional music plays on the Force theme and on a French horn, which is reflective. The sound of the French horn reflects off the back of the auditorium, and so is inherently emotional and evocative of the past. Fun orchestration bit for you there. That's a long, slow scene that helps us care about Luke. In today's world, that scene would be cut out to save another 15 seconds. It would. And there's no comparable scene like that in either of these last two movies. The closest one was Rey pulling junk out of a wrecked Star Destroyer, and there was music written for that John Williams wrote for that, but J.J. Abrams actually cut it. So it's on the soundtrack, but it's not in the movie. So these are all really good points, and this is probably where I'll leave it, is that there is a little trick that George Lucas does at the beginning of Star Wars to evoke emotion, and people have been copying that, and it's not to say that George Lucas invented it. He copied it from people before him. That you have a sort of save the cat moment. You have these moments that evoke sort of sympathy and empathy in characters, make you care about them, and having dead parents is a big one. That's an easy one for people to connect to and to immediately have sympathy for somebody, especially a young person whose parents who grew up without their parents. That's why so many Disney movies, their parents are dead in Cinderella. Like, everybody's parents are always dead because it immediately evokes your sense of empathy. That's just a fun trick. Roald Dahl does it constantly, and I'll probably do a video on some of those tricks at some point, when I can get to it. So I'll probably leave it there. I know this is a longer video because it just answers a lot of questions. I will pick it up from there. I couldn't find people who were calling me a jerk too much. I'll leave it with this quote. It's not about finding the ones we hate, but saving the ones we love. Kill me. Have a good one, folks. Don't forget, hop on my mailing list. You can grab my newest book for free. Actually, it's out on BookFunnel. So I'll put a link, or, you can just head to dvspress.com/list and it'll all be sitting out. And in that email, I'll explain everything that I'm doing with this upcoming story for you business people and stuff who are maybe interested in what I'm going to be trying out for that. So have a great one, and I'll see you guys next time.